Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to our Star Awards showcase for 2023. By means of introduction, my name is Paul Menzies. By day, I am the Brand and Marketing Director for the beer portfolio at C&C. By night, and occasionally on a Tuesday, I am the chair of the Star Awards with the Marketing Society Scotland. And it's really good to be here today to chat to you, budding first-time entrants, and I'm sure some seasoned past entrants, talking about what makes a winning entry to the Star Awards. Thankfully, I'm joined by three gold-winning past case studies and papers, individuals and personalities, and that's why we're here today. We're going to talk about perhaps you have an idea or an inclination to enter the awards, and so we're going to share, I guess, what is expected and what is required, and what makes the secret recipe for a winning entry. And just as a bit of housekeeping, before we talk to our guests, just to let you know that the awards are open to members and non-members, and there is no charge to enter or for a first-time entry. And then the full entry criteria is available on the Marketing Society Scotland website, and also on there, which is I've found really helpful in the past, is some past winning case studies. Really give an idea about how compelling a paper succeeds. The theme of the awards this year is wildly effective work, and the focus within that is on a fairly wide zoological theme of some animals, and it's mostly on the results and how compelling they are that come through in a paper. And they can be commercial results, they could be changing behavior, they can really be quite varied, but we've come up with that theme in collaboration with Guy and Co. And the sort of theme that we looked at, or the stimulus for coming up with that theme, was that lots has changed over the last 3 years. But perhaps because of that change, or through that change, our businesses, our institutions have become more demanding or more requiring of the results to be really top notch. So that's what we're looking to see through award entries. A little bit more housekeeping before I introduce our guests, is that judging is also open for the Star Awards to all members. There is a limit on 4 judges per organisation, and I'm glad to say that 100 people, or over 100 people, have already registered to judge this year. There will be a link in the chat to find out more about judging and how to register. And then secondly, the closing date for the awards is the 13th of February. There is a little fee you can pay as a late fee, but in my experience, it's a bit of a struggle to expense that. So I would recommend early entry. And then just as another reminder that nominations for some categories are also free, and it's a case of nomination as opposed to a paper being submitted. For example, for the Rising Stars across agency and marketing, nominations are open. So if you have that Rising Star individual that you feel is deserving of recognition, by all means do nominate them. So we are going to hear from 3 guests. I will introduce them very shortly. And then at the end, we're going to have a bit of a Q&A. So if you have any questions, please use the chat function, and I will try to moderate as best as I can. One last final reminder is that we have a hashtag, Star Awards 23, if you're that way inclined. And we have a Twitter handle, Marketing Scotland, if you would like to engage on Twitter with today or with the awards between now and the Summer Gala. Without any further ado, I will introduce our first guests from the lane. They are Barry Fern and Liam Hall, and they are here today to share a gold-winning paper case study with Fair Facts and Favour. Hi Barry, hi Liam.
Hi Paul, thanks for the tee up.
Hi everyone.
Hello everyone, we can't see you at the moment, just the way this is set up, so I assume that you can see and hear me okay, and you can now see my screen?
Yes.
I'm not going to quite go full screen because my Mac seems to break on Zoom if I go full screen, but hopefully that's big enough for everybody to see the text. As Paul mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about our gold winning campaign for Fairfax and Favour that we entered last year, and essentially how we helped them to massively increase their sales in the last couple of years via diverse paid social media-led strategy. One of the questions that was asked, and I'm sure we will all talk about this a little bit today, is, how much time should be allowed? And I guess the answer to that is the clock is ticking. It's already ticking, and it probably was ticking since the announcement pre-Christmas. But actually, if you think about it, certainly in sort of data-rich campaigns or sales-driven campaigns like this one, the reality is it kind of started a year ago because we have to collect data. If we're talking about performance media and we're talking about results and we're talking about effectiveness, we should always be collecting data. So as us marketeers like acronyms, maybe remember the ABCD, always be collecting data. Work back from the mid-February deadline and do treat it as a deadline as much as there is flexibility from the Marketing Society. We all know we would love to be in a position where we're not submitting our entry 5 days late from the official deadline, at 10 o'clock the night before it absolutely must go in. So work back from the mid-Feb deadline. Internal discussions, ideally pre-Christmas, even though that's, when we're really busy, there should be enough time to collate some of those decks and pull some of that data together if you've got enough sort of willing hands to get involved. And then even as a kind of good piece of housekeeping, diarise your internal appointments to discuss the paper or the potential papers for early January. So at least you've got those appointments in the diary. So you're not coming back in January and then going, right, where do we start? And that should really include kind of everybody involved, both client and agency side. But if you haven't started yet, don't be put off. It can be turned around in 2 or 3 weeks with a really good paper, with dedication, probably with a little bit of overtime. So it's not too late if you haven't quite started yet. But best practice, definitely get your ducks in a row pre-Christmas. Talked a little bit there about collaboration. Most, if not all clients are likely to want to have some significant involvement, up front in terms of pulling that data together, probably a sort of work in progress kind of mid review, and then certainly kind of final sign off. We're quite fortunate with Fairfax. They're quite hands off when it comes to these kind of things. They're happy for us to, talk about them and talk about, our partnership and our work on a really close level. But of course, they're always involved and engaged in kind of what we're doing. But most clients will want to have a kind of pre and a mid and a sort of final review. Also a little tip to involve key members who are maybe not as directly hands-on involved in that account. They're the ones who can maybe pick up little nuances and nuggets where the people that are closest to particular clients, might talk in a slightly different language about that client than possibly somebody reading it for the first time. So nice tip for a bit of housekeeping there. Obvious things really, regular check-ins and keep client in the loop. And just remember that once you say award entry out loud to the client, then there's no going back, or it's very hard to pedal back, should I say. And then a little bit on storytelling and the structure. Remember, it's not War and Peace. There's a word count for a reason. And we've fallen foul of that a little bit ourselves. Editing, copywriting is obviously a great skill to have. And there will be people within your business that are better than that than others. So utilize them again, even if they're not massively involved in that account. And the headline data is key, especially again, if we're talking about sales, performance, effectiveness, but too much data can be overkill. Nobody judging the paper wants to look at charts and graphs, page after page. Don't be tempted to embellish, tell the true story. I've certainly personally judged papers whereby there might be a result in the executive summary up front or a piece of data. And then when it gets down to the kind of nitty gritty of the data later on in the document, there's maybe a bit of a discrepancy. And that ultimately kind of puts the entrant on a bit of the back foot, because the judge is kind of going, well, hang on a sec, which number's right? Is it the first number or the second number? if you're new to entering, then the best way to learn what good looks like is take part in judging. Again, as Paul's already mentioned, there's 4 spots per agency, so there's plenty of opportunity for people to get involved. It's a really good learning opportunity for people as well. So regardless of your position, there's no reason why you can't get involved in judging. And ultimately, over time, the best data is your own data. So you'll learn from your own wins and losses. We've been entering for about 8 years now. So we've got a number of successful papers and maybe some papers which have been less successful as well. So, re-look at them and try and understand what went well and maybe what didn't, and review other award-winning entries too. They're usually publicly available. So have a look at what they might have in common.
Great. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time kind of explaining how we told the Fairfax story and really just how we started to set the scene for our submission. So with Fairfax, in less than 10 years, they've really gone from being a startup with I popped a picture in here of what their first kind of show looked like, where they've got this kind of amateurish looking logo and banner up front, but they've really grown into this kind of multi-award winning brand, and they've got this almost cult-like following, I would say. So it's been fantastic, and it's been a fantastic journey for us. We've been really involved as their media partners, and we really wanted to make sure that we were making that visible within our submission. So I've kind of popped in here as well the Google Trends for Fairfax in Favor, and that just gives you an idea here of the trajectory that they've been on. They've been on this really consistent growth, and that's kind of what we wanted to get across. But we really wanted to detail, how were we responsible for helping with that growth? So we first met them. Oh, sorry. Do you want to jump back for me, Barry? So yeah, we first were kind of approached by Fairfax around 8 years ago. So this relationship's been ongoing for 8 years. And it's really blossomed into this brilliant relationship where we really work as partners. And again, we wanted that to come across. So we wanted this complete story of how close we are and how we support not just their kind of marketing decision makers, but their wider marketing team. And we wanted all of that to come across in our submission, how much we understand their client, the client background, and the history of the brand, and how much we understand their business and their customers. You can jump ahead for me now. So we've actually been here before as well. So just kind of setting the scene, we submitted and won silver back in 2009 for helping Fairfax to forensically fine-tune Facebook. So I just wanted to highlight this because I think it's important to note that just because you've ended before, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't enter again with the same client. If you've got more great work to show, we were really, really keen. We'd had the silver. We really wanted to go for the gold, and we were successful this time. So just wanted to highlight that. And one of the other things to note as well is we've carved out a real kind of niche for ourselves as an agency when it comes to e-commerce. So within the e-commerce space, we've got a kind of wealth of clients, and we had some amazing results to choose from. We still really wanted that gold for Fairfax though, hence why we kind of resubmitted with Fairfax. And they are kind of one of our biggest e-com clients, and we had the results to prove it. So we're really fortunate in the sense that not only have we got Fairfax in Favor's historical benchmarks to look back at, we can look at their year on year and see their growth. We also have our kind of range of e-com clients to look at. So I think a top tip for me is to just kind of have a look across your client base and just see, is there anything that's really standing out? Is there anyone that's booking the trend? Is there any kind of exceptional results that you can attribute back to your campaign? And that really does give you that standout. And then I think another key point for me is to really start off strong, ensure that your headline stats can't be missed. I think, particularly with media, it's really, really easy to get lost in the detail. We've got a wealth of information that we're sharing with the client and we're sharing internally. But the key stats that we really wanted to highlight here are how have we really helped them as a business and what has been the business impact. So it's all about that storytelling and what overall has the campaign delivered, rather than getting bogged down in the detail around which particular ad was served up to which audience and which audience was responding best, or which creative route was resonating. I think it's all about what were the headline stats and how did they contribute to the business's bottom line. And then this is another one. So we basically, one of the elements that we were really keen to include was any kind of external validation that we'd had. So we were actually featured in the TikTok Global Trends report. So very exciting for us. We were the only agency, I think globally or potentially in the UK, that were mentioned in this report. We were really thrilled, it just kind of allowed us to kind of give that third-party verification as well, that validation that what we delivered has been recognized by TikTok. So that's just something, if you've got any kind of external validation, to include that within the paper. And then I would say to focus on what makes your campaign unique is really important. So what we've really tried to do here is, there is the kind of traditional route that we've gone down, and while the kind of lion's share of what we delivered revenue-wise was via Meta, Facebook and Instagram, your traditional kind of acquisition channels, we really wanted to focus in on the other elements of the campaign that perhaps weren't well-worn strategies. So an example of that being TikTok, where we were able to deliver 3.9 million likes over the course of the year. And we were able to increase their followers by 12 times over, which was brilliant. And then Snapchat, again, not really known as being a direct response platform, not known for something where you're able to recruit new customers, or not particularly easily anyways. And we had an absolutely incredible result from Snapchat, £4 million worth of attributable revenue, and a kind of overwhelming 72-to-1 ROI, which, a kind of anecdote that we were so skeptical about this that we regularly had kind of the team from Snapchat and the web developers from Fairfax on the line just to try and make sure that this attribution was actually accurate, because that's it's a ROAS metric that you're just not used to seeing. And then finally, one of the things that we did was kind of looked at lead gen as well. So within our Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, we utilized what is traditionally a B2B format, and we were incentivizing people to sign up for early access to the sale. So this is just a kind of a unique way to use formats in the way that they weren't necessarily built for. So traditionally B2B, but we're basically saying to people, if you can sign up for early access, all you need to do is pop your details in here. We then did some matchback analysis just to see how that delivered and how many people from that CRM then purchased. And it's been amazing. It's been really successful and something that we're rolling out moving forward. So I think anything that is kind of unique within the campaign, or anything that you've done that was unique that delivered results, is really worth putting in there as well. And then final one from me before I hand back over to Barry. So I think just a quick summary of what I think is worthwhile including and what I think you should leave out. So it's potentially a bit of a no-brainer, but objectives. So, stating your campaign objectives, making sure they're really specific, they're measurable, they're timed. That's really important. And then numbers as well. So saying how much it costs, what the success means for the business, including an ROI metric if you've got one. Showing your results, and how do these relate back to those initial objectives? I think that we've really tried to tell that story of, this is what we set out to achieve, this is what we were able to deliver. And I think that's really important in just making sure that the paper flows. And then what I think from an exclusion point of view, I touched on it before, but I think just avoid too much detail. We report on all that really granular data to our clients, and we're really all in that data day to day. But it doesn't need to be in there. It's all about those results that actually impact the business and contributed to those objectives that you'd set yourself at the beginning.
And a couple of final tips just to kind of stay on track. The question was asked around, what should be in your checklist, and this is just really, good due diligence, I guess, when it gets down to some slight nuances or differences between some of the different categories. So, for example, media here, where we entered a paper and we got silver, versus retail where we got the gold. There's just a slight change in where those points can be scored. So it might be thinking slightly differently about kind of how you balance the structure of that paper with those particular sort of point scoring in mind against the different categories. And then sort of finally, really on sort of that checklist, there's always, it's consistent across the Star Awards that there's 20 points up for grabs for both the presentation and the quality of the writing. So again, it might not necessarily be best written by the people closest, to that paper, or at least should be co-authored by, somebody from a kind of copywriting point of view. And, especially for us, we're a media agency. So when we're thinking about how do we make our paper stand out, then we're going to need design resource. We can't rely on our media planners to put together the most impactful looking paper if we're up against some creative agencies and some of the best talent in Scotland when it comes to design. So, you know, ensure that we got a designer involved as well, so it could look as good as it can. We wouldn't want to miss out on a few points there, and that being the difference between a gold and a silver, or a silver and a bronze, or a bronze and a nothing. And then finally, I guess, celebrate success. You know, if you follow some of these tips, then hopefully you can enjoy your stars moment as much as we did, because we certainly did have a good night. And then very last thing, final tip, if you like, then important to remember that your content, you know, this award entry, it's kind of evergreen, or it's at least it's got multi facets. You know, it's a case study on your website, it's a new piece of new business collateral, it's other award entries. So we took this successful submission from June last year, and we customized it a little bit, and we entered into a European wide awards in December, and were delighted when we were named alongside some rather larger brands than us and Fairfax and Favour in winning the most effective and measurable campaign at the DigiDay Awards. So, you know, as much as this is a Star Awards kind of showcase, the reality is that content, that collateral is multifunctional and should be considered as much from an investment in money and time perspective. And that's it from us.
Thank you very much, Barry and Liam. Some fantastic insight and some fantastic practical tips. We now move on to our second guest from John Doe Agency, talking about Iron Brew. It's Tim Malseed. Hi, Tim.
Hey, everybody. How y'all doing? I'm just going to share the screen, so let me know whenever it goes full screen. So yeah, I'm a senior account director over at John Doe. I head up the Iron Brew account, which I've been working on for a couple of years, and I'm going to take you guys through an entry that we put into the 2022 Marketing Society Star Awards on behalf of Iron Brew in the PR category with the name Bibbidi Bobbidi Brew. So I'll give you guys like a quick overview of the campaign before I get into the entry, so you can kind of see, you know, what it was we were trying to achieve, and then I can break down in a bit more detail some of the things that we put into the entry that should hopefully help you guys to create your own award-winning campaigns and entries. So Iron Brew is a brand that I don't think will need much explanation to this group, but you guys are also probably familiar with like the brand's presence at Christmas. It's obviously a key kind of selling window for Iron Brew and I assume for most FMCG brands. It's also got like the Snowman campaign, which it kind of sees as sort of officially kickstarting Christmas within Scotland. And once that advert comes on, it's almost game on for Christmas in the nation of Scotland. We were kind of tasked with making the brand become the most talked about in Scotland at Christmas 2021. And it really wanted to be big and bold, driving mass talkability, but it also didn't want to lose like the kind of magic of Christmas. And that was a key part of what we were tasked with doing. With regards to the audience, we were given like quite a tricky sort of categorization of something that would appeal to not just like Gen Z, which is a big target audience, but also for Iron Brew, but also to families. And I think if you're to say to a 16-year-old that Iron Brew are trying to launch a campaign that will not only appeal to them, but will also appeal to their mum and dad, they're going to laugh at you and think that that's just impossible. But that's kind of the challenge that we were set. So I'll get onto the methodology shortly, but essentially what we did was, in keeping with like kind of Christmas pantomime troops, and more about that in a moment, we appointed recent at the time drag race winner Lawrence Cheney as Scotland's official fairy godma, in keeping with pantomime, the famous like pantomime Dame character. Alongside our agency partners at Leaf and 7 Stars, we created some amazing content for social. We created like a little video, some video assets, really like sweated the time and availability that we had with Lawrence, as well as like this PR angle where consumers were granted a wish to the fairy godma, which Lawrence might just make come true. And we even took to the streets with her, decked out in her amazing branded fairy godmother costume and a specially created chariot and throne, showing up at some people's front doors as well to personally gift them brew. So here's just like some of the results that we got from that. Some great PR, social influencer, real 360 approach, generated a lot of publicity for the brand, which is obviously one of the reasons why we then went for the Star Awards. So I think the first sort of tip from this award that I would say is like refine your insight. You'll be doing this at the start of every campaign anyway, but when it comes to rewards, it really needs to be super tight. You need you really want to show the why and the who cares, and show like not just the end insight that you came to, but I think give the judges a bit of a glimpse under the bonnet and show them like, how did you find that insight? Like what type of like channels or research did you do to get there? Was social listening telling you something? And then like, how did that sort of end up in your consumer truth? And most importantly, like, how does this all tie back to the brief? So for the purpose of Lawrence, working with Lawrence, the first thing that we did was actually, whenever we were given the brief, we just commissioned some research, using I think something like 72 points across Scotland about the highs and lows of Christmases for everyday Scots, covering a whole bunch of different things that people associate with Christmas, and pantomime across generations came out as one of the things that was a universal love. And straight away, whenever we've been asked to do something for Gen Z and for the boomers as well, their parents, like this is coming out as something that is instantaneously unites them. And then we found from that the Panto Dame character, which is commonly associated with Panto, it actually originated in Scotland, in Glasgow. So like Glaswegians invented that character. So there's nice tie-ups with the brand. And then from further digging on social research, social listening, when we were thinking like, who would be a really good Panto Dame character? People were already calling for a tie-up between Lawrence and Irn-Bru, and Lawrence had just won RuPaul's Drag Race. So like her career was hot at the time. And there was real opportunities for the brand. I think there's real like similarity. We identified real similarities with their overall kind of tone of voice and aesthetic, and it's just like a really great fit for the brand. So I get back to that sort of tip is insight and planning, super key, and let the judges know how you got there. The second thing is like tell a story. Like we're all storytellers. So make sure that your entry's also sort of telling a tale, spinning a yarn. Tell the story, I guess, how you told the story, if that makes sense. Like, so like one of the things that we did was straight away was like paint the picture of like what we're trying to achieve with this like Panto Dame character, how it's like it's sort of like bold and funny and like totally in keeping with like Irn-Bru's tone of voice. Like talk about why we've picked like Lawrence as that character, and then like set out exactly the different like tactics that you roll out and like how they were deliberately chosen as referencing back to like the objectives in the brief. Just kind of don't assume that the judges like know anything about your campaign, and again like kind of take them on that journey, and be like really engaging, and just like created a world whenever you made your campaign, like create that again so that the judges can immerse themselves into it. And I think as well, like there's going to be like so many things that kind of popped up that bring it to life, so like don't be afraid to like add in a bit of color and anecdotes, like just like try and like bring your own kind of tone of voice into it so that you're being really, really engaging. And I think that's important because there is a lot of entries, and it is the judges will go over every single one with the care and attention it needs, but like how are you going to stand out? And overall then it will like validate everything that you've done. So if you're telling, if your narrative isn't compelling and engaging, the amazing thinking and incredible results that you want to shout about do kind of stand the risk of getting lost. Tip 3, and maybe this is a little bit uneasy whenever you're talking about the great work that you've done, but I've written warts and all here. Like, don't be afraid to like make reference to like some of the bumps that you encountered along the way. Like whether your agency or client side, like you're gonna, that not everything goes exactly to plan. but it's how people kind of problem solve them that kind of differentiate it and show the overall success. So like whenever you're writing an award, and again, it goes back to the storytelling, it goes back to like the anecdotes that I mentioned before. Adding a little bit of color, a wee shade of tension into an entry sort of helps build that story, and it shows like what the team did to achieve success and greatness, but also that they were willing to like adapt and pivot at the last minute. So one of the things that with Lawrence was, given that her career was so hot at that time because she just won RuPaul's Drag Race, the time that we were given was like really, really limited, and we just had to like really, really we had to like work extremely hard to do like shoots and interviews and content creation, and then also like going out and about into the wild. And I think there was also like a moment where like a key part of the costume like hadn't arrived and stuff had to be like fixed in post. But it's all just about like how like the team working smart and just being able to react in situations where things do not always align to the plan that was set out at the beginning of the process. The other thing that I'd like to touch on is results. We're really good, I think, as a sector about talking about like our results, and it's obviously like so important to what we do. But and I think like this was touched on by the guys at the Lane, like how does it correspond with your objectives and like what was actually achieved for the brand? Like what was set out, what were you tasked to do? What did you achieve, and how did that actually benefit against the brief? And I think at the beginning of every award entry, you will be asked to set out your objectives, and kind of one of the final stages, you're asked to set out your results. And it's just like such an obvious thing, but just make sure that you're cross-referencing like what you set out to achieve against the results that you deliver, and make sure that they're matching up so that you can show that you've basically achieved what you were essentially paid to do by the client, or what the campaign was originally supposed to do. But also like there's more to success than just numbers. Numbers are great, like whether it's impressions or clicks or PR reach or whatever, but I think link that back to actually how that achieved the brief, how you know that achieved the brief, or also just like any kind of really nice anecdotes or colorful commentary, again like back to this sort of storytelling that showed their impact. So like we were one of our objectives was become the most talked about Scottish brand over Christmas, and there's obviously ways that we can kind of prove that with regards to share of voice from December of 2021. But then there was other like really quite nice anecdotal things that we were made aware of during or immediately after our campaign that showed it was really cutting through to the audiences. So one of the things was that Lawrence was doing like loads of like gigs and appearances and performances around this time, and people were bringing her cans of Iron Brew to sign because they'd seen the campaign across all the different channels. And the other one was like this piece of artwork that's on the screen. People were basically creating their own Iron Brew artwork and sending it to us and to Lawrence around this campaign, which is like, I don't know, I guess that's like money can't buy like advocacy almost, that it's that the campaign has punched through and cut through like that much that people are making their own builds on it. And just like one of the final things that I want to touch on is just like time. Whether your agency or client side, like I totally get that, you know, there's great intentions for writing awards and winning them. But whenever there's other like more pressing things, like whether it's the core job, like it can be pushed to the bottom, and it can just run out like so quickly. I think there's still loads of time to craft an amazing award entries for this year's cycle. But I think like I would advise you try and like get onto it as soon as you can. A good award entry takes time, and it involves, chances are it's going to involve a few people. You might have to get sign off from different like parts of the business or like partners, other agencies, clients, whatever way it is. So just like making sure that you've factored in that timeline, working back from the deadline is so important. and just like it's going to be a better result. You're gonna craft a stronger narrative. You're gonna present it better with design. I've said 5 weeks is quite a nice window. It can be done in less, but if you wanted to, like, from the moment like you're looking through the website to like choosing award entries to writing everything down, getting different people to review it, and design and submission, it's quite a comfortable window. And I think just a wee tip is like and something that we do is like it's that just very early establish a process for review. So get someone from the account team to review it, and then introduce like a fresh pair of eyes out from outside the campaign team. And I think one person who reviews absolutely everything is also like really important, so that you can kind of make sure that if you're submitting lots of awards, that they kind of feel as if they're part of the same family. And yeah, that's all from Bibbidi Bobbidi Brew. Really amazing campaign to work on. One of our first for Ambry, but we've done quite a few since, and we're really, really proud of the work and being able to link up Lawrence Cheney with one of Scotland's fabric brands.
Thank you very much indeed, Tim. I really like the balance of the tangible and the anecdotal, and the storytelling and the strategy, and a chunk of honesty there in results, but yeah, also in the amount of time and the intention that needs to be put on a winning paper. Thank you.
No problem.
And with that, we'll move on to our third and final guest, and that is Lindsay Snodden of the Union, who's going to be talking to us about a Scottish Government campaign. Hi, Lindsay.
Hi Paul, hi everyone, and thanks for having me. Third to go, so hopefully at this point I've got something unique to say. And yeah, I'm here to talk about the What Teaching Taught Me campaign, and thankfully being supported by Elise, who's going to share my slides for me. And this is an award entry that won both a gold and silver at last year's Star Awards in the digital strategy and digital communication categories. I'm going to talk to you about two things. I guess we're all here to discuss A, what does an award-winning campaign look like, but B, the process that you can follow to write an award-winning entry. So hopefully I'll be able to shine a light on both of those things. And I'll start off, if you go on to the next slide, Elise, just talking a little bit about the campaign. Next slide. So for those of you that haven't seen it, this was a teacher recruitment campaign that was run in collaboration with Scottish Government, Stripe PR and Republic of Media. And the brief that we were given was, as you all know and have probably experienced, that teachers are the bedrock of Scotland's education system. And in 2020, we needed to recruit more, but most especially in STEM subjects as a key focus of the curriculum development going forward. The challenge was that to teach in a secondary school in Scotland, and specifically in STEM subjects, you need both an undergraduate degree in the subject and a postgraduate degree in education. So what we really needed to do was to encourage STEM undergraduates, so those studying science, technology, engineering and mathematics, to consider studying a postgraduate and moving into teaching, which is an interesting challenge. Next slide. And in doing that, we knew that we had to kind of really tap into this audience's mindset. But there were two major challenges on the forefront, and that was A, the audience's perception, and B, the fact that we were creating this campaign amidst the pandemic. So if you click just next for me, Elise. Perception-wise, we were really up against it, and that's mainly to do with the fact that we were dealing with STEM undergrads who had chosen to study these subjects with the view of entering a career within them. So when we present teaching on the table, we were challenged with the worries around whether there were progression opportunities, also concerns around the career lacking diversity, not just in the people that were standing at the front of the class, but in the kind of day-to-day job that they were doing. And people tended to see teaching as something that was very samey day in, day out. There was also the perception that you can't be what you can't see. We had every single person we spoke to had their own experience of a teacher. So they had a vision in their head as to what a teacher looked like. And we were having to kind of tackle that too. And the decade-long saying of, if you can't do, teach, which we knew was a big challenge. And there was also this perception of it being a lonely career. There's kind of one person standing at the front of a class with 30 children, and so not necessarily seeing the kind of teamwork, fulfilling element of the careers that they'd went in and desired. So we've got this massive perception challenge on one side, and then on the opposite side, if you click for me, Elise, was that we were up against it and had really practical challenges amidst the pandemic. In the previous years, we'd really utilised kind of campus visits and events to speak to these people face to face and answer their questions and challenge those perceptions. So now our audience were even harder to reach, and we had them fully digital, and quite a lot of and quite a journey to take them on. We were also kind of tackling emerging channels and the likes of TikTok, when previously we hadn't thought about that as for our recruitment campaigns. And then we had practical production challenges. So we could not get out into schools because children weren't at schools and there was no students there. We couldn't use real teachers. And actually we were just generally limited in terms of the production capabilities that we had, and then faced also by a time of uncertainty. Next slide. So what did we do? Well, we knew that we had three main things that we had to do. We had to try and elevate teaching from a kind of safety net career. And to do that, we thought about kind of showcasing the fulfilling moments that we knew from speaking to teachers that made their jobs rewarding. So we thought, okay, number one, we have to showcase that fulfilling, meaningful moment. We also had to really challenge the perceptions head on by showing how teaching could fulfill the ambitions of these really smart, really driven STEM students, and that we also had to display an element of it being an inclusive role for everyone. Next slide. So what did we do? Through a lot of testing and development with the target audience, we ended up with the idea that's what teaching taught me, where we used real teachers talking about real experiences and real moments, things that they had experienced in the classroom that had challenged their own perceptions of what they thought their career might be. And then we also had to really kind of dial up the reward and benefits of the career, whether that was the pay, the progression opportunities, and the different elements of the career. We had to challenge the diversity, and we had to, more than anything, really utilise digital channels to reach this audience. Next slide. And we ended up with this. So this is just a kind of whistle-stop tour, I guess, of the campaign. And it's a couple of screenshots from our ad, or our digital ads. So we had 5 primary executions to communicate the messages and showcase diversity. And in each of these, we kind of pulled out on a key benefit or a key learning. So on one side, we had that teaching taught me that you never stop learning. And that was purely to challenge that perception that it was a kind of dead end, like, easy career, which it's not. And then we had the secrets of leadership and negotiation to show the kind of progression opportunities, how to turn if I go to college into when I go to college. So a range of different benefits and key messages that we pulled out. Next slide. And then this was the kind of main element and the main part that made up our award entry. And that was our execution, our digital execution more than anything. So we had these messages that we had to communicate, but the key challenge for the campaign was how we took people on a journey from seeing that on their social channels and then leading them through into the website or into other digital channels where they could really cement the reasons as to why teaching would be the right career for them. We utilised video content, short form stories. We also hosted online virtual events with influencers and with teachers where we invited the audience to come and ask questions. We developed an integrated and automated ECRM system that allowed people to register, and then they were taken on an 8-week journey through the initial consideration of the career, through what the benefits would be, through the case studies, and we were showcasing content on a weekly basis. We also did podcasts with teachers where we asked difficult questions that would challenge the perceptions. And then we really utilised website content that took people on a journey, whether that was looking at case studies with teachers, but right through to helping them with personal statements for their UCAS applications. Next slide. And the results kind of speak for themselves. We had 87,000 web visits, 2,500 digital event attendees, 600 email database registrations, 10,000 people using the how to apply content, and in the end, over 50,000 postgraduate applications, which was up 1,000 on the previous year, which was amazing for us considering the time and the challenges that we were facing. So very quick whistle-stop tour of the campaign. And with that, you'd say simply award-winning, right? Except it wasn't quite as simple as that. Next slide, Elise. You see that as I'm kind of summarising this, the journey that we had to go on in order to summarise it even as quickly today and get an award-winning paper is the difficult part. And I think many of you will agree, if working in this industry, that as much as we might believe that the campaign process is very linear through brief and then research and insight and creative execution, it never really works like that. And then what happens is you're having to kind of navigate challenges as you go. And so when it comes to at this point in the year where you're sitting down and collecting your Star Award entries, the hardest part is crafting that story and trying to go back and look at the challenges that you had to overcome in order to see where the actual real story in the award-winning entry exists. Now, I've got 5 tips that I'll give you a quick tour of if Elise goes on to the next slide. And I'll chat to you a little bit about what writing this STAR paper taught me. Slide. Step 1 is really kind of working out, do you have the story to tell? So when we are doing this process at Union, we make a list of every campaign that we put out the year before, not just the ones that we think are the kind of bigger budgets or the bigger clients. We look at them all. And if you go on to the next slide, we create a bit of a matrix. Next slide, Elise. So we create this matrix where we'll pull out the 4 main things that a STAR paper needs, and you'll all be familiar with these titles, I'm sure, which is clarity of objectives, strategic thinking and effective planning, creativity and results. And we put a matrix together and we answer for each of our campaigns, do we have these things? So for objectives, did it have a clear purpose? Was there a real reason to do that campaign? For strategic thinking, was it informed by insight? And that doesn't need to be research with the audience. It can simply be a stat that was pulled from Google Analytics that meant you then had to do this different creative solution. What was different about the creative solution? Was there something that you did differently to years before? Was there a reason for that? And then lastly, the results. Did it have meaningful impact? Next slide. The next thing that I think is actually really important, and I sometimes think people overlook, is picking the category. It's often easy to fall into the trap of, oh, this is a tourism client, so we'll stick them in tourism, when actually the category is the key part. A prime example, the teachers one, that could also have been entered in public sector or advertising or integrated marketing. It could have been entered into several categories, but actually our results were strongest when it came to looking at the audience that we built in this digital space. And that was why we crafted the paper for those digital categories. And one of the reasons why I think that it was best placed for a gold win. Next slide. The next thing is consider the competition. We've all really touched on that, but I think, again, it's a key one. Even when you're picking your category, look not just at the winning paper from the year before, but all of the nominations. Who were the 6 shortlisted? Who won? What was the difference between the person that came bronze versus the person that came gold? Really look at them, consider them, and do your research. Next slide. Everybody's touched on this, as you can probably see, but I've been judging now for about 3 or 4 years, and I think every single time the papers that tell a real story are the ones that engage you. It isn't an essay. Yes, it's easy to be tricked into I say tricked, it's not a trick, but it's easy to look at the categories and go, we get 20 points for that and 15 points here. And that is important. And yes, we have to focus on that, but we also have to tell a story, and it needs to feel cohesive and it needs to build, because that's what makes it memorable. And that's what's going to transition it from a shortlisted entry into a gold award winner. Next slide. It takes an army. One thing I will say is, yes, you need a leader. Each paper should have at least one person that is a single person that is responsible for the final delivery, because that's what that ownership helps to kind of give you momentum. But don't forget that it does take an army. I would be kidding myself if I had to take credit for the teacher's paper on my own. It was heavily influenced by Scottish Government, by Republic of Media, by Stripe PR, by the creatives that actually executed and produced the campaign, by the planner that did the original research. Every single one of them helped me with a draft or wrote their own draft. And that was how we ended up with the story that we did in the end. Next slide. And then the last and final point from me is simplicity is key. Again, you aren't just trying to communicate the story or the journey that you have. You're also trying to stand out from another 15 entries in that category. Being simple, being memorable is key, because the judges will have lots of you to go through. And so the less words that you use, the more visuals that you utilize, the simpler your paper is to understand, the more likely that you are going to be memorable. And that's it from me.
Thank you very much indeed, Lindsay. I really love the 6-step science that you've applied to the time of year. It's really easy to ask, how do I tell the story in a coherent, concise way of something that happened sometimes 10 months ago? Thanks very much for that. And that takes us on to time for questions. However, oh, here we go. From Claire Willis, thank you very much, to Tim on the John Doe Iron Brew campaign. Was it a one-off collaboration with Lawrence Cheney, or are you looking to have a longer partnership? If so, how will you build on this?
At the time, yeah, it was a one-off partnership. She fitted really, really well with that Christmas character. She's definitely someone that we would work with again. It was a really great working relationship, and she gave absolutely everything to the role, and it worked really, really well. But we don't have anything planned at the moment. But that's not to say that for 2023 you might see her in a brew dress once again.
Good to hear. Thank you very much, Tim. And thank you for the question, Claire. From Jan, how did you prepare for when you first judged any papers? I guess that could be for all of us. I guess the judging criteria is quite specific, but there's also quite a lot of papers to judge at once. So I find it really important to have quite a clear mind and certainly a clear diary. And then sometimes, as is the case with judging anything, revisiting a paper after reading 3 or 4 makes sense, because I guess your level of objectivity and the level of context changes when you see a paper that's particularly good. Especially, I don't know if Barry, Liam, Lindsay, Tim, you would add anything to your experience of judging. The only other thing I would add is that I always thoroughly enjoy debate and interpretation in those environments, and I guess the environment you're in and the frame of mind you're in can lead to different interpretation.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Paul. And usually what happens when you're judging is you get assigned to 2 categories. And when you consider that, you could get, say, 12, possibly even as many as 15 in some categories. Not always, again, depends on the strength of the category. So let's say 20 to 25 across 2 categories. It's a lot to judge. So whilst it's actually a really empowering and educational experience to do so, and it gives you a bit of market insight, it gives you a bit of insight to different clients and some different ideas and different styles and the different way that people present and put things together, then you do need to allow enough time. And I would definitely allow 2 separate periods of time for 2 separate categories, because your mindset has to be quite different. If you're flipping from public sector to digital strategy or advertising to any other category, you just need to allow enough time and allow 2 separate parts of time for each for each different sector or category that you're judging.
Yeah, Thanks very much, Barry. And we have a further question from Lisa. Any advice for anyone going it alone, i.e. someone like me, client side, with writing a paper? I guess as the sole client side person, I should probably answer that. A couple of the guests touched on it. I really liked, Lindsay, you spoke about an army, and I enjoy a rowing analogy as well. So I thoroughly enjoyed the paper as well. It does take a variety of people from, if we talk about my experience about building a paper, commercial finance, commercial insight, not just the YouGov brand reporting or the sales channel reporting that we would look at. And I think, Tim, you touched on the anecdotal, and there is probably more places to look for that insight, social listening, or even internal interviews. What was the internal interpretation of a campaign? Did it change stakeholders' views and perceptions and momentum within intercompany conversations, as well as commercial or behavioural results? I don't know if agency side you would have anything to add. I guess based on your conversations when you're building papers collaboratively.
I think actually that's a really good point. When I said it takes an army, it's like like as much as there might be, even if it's you that's single-handedly writing it, the people that have the information that are going to help you craft the meaningful story, there will be other people that played a role. And I think even just having a conversation with them, and I think as well, if you can get any kind of design or creative assistance, I always think that trying to design and write the paper are two very, even I've helped design, not a designer or a creative, but I've helped put like images and structure a paper for someone, because trying to do both sides of it is actually can be quite overwhelming. So if you can even get someone to help you lay it out in a slide deck or something, and it just helps to kind of diversify where your focus is, I think, if anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lindsay. Elise has gone back to a question from Susan. Thank you, Susan. Great question, Pamela. What makes your heart sing and sink as judges? For me, what makes my heart sing, really clear objectives up front, and then really clear results that correspond to the clear objectives at the end. What makes my heart sink? Someone taking absolute liberties with the word count. It's an easy one, but I'm going to claim it before I open it up to the guests.
I would say, but if they don't use subheadings, that because you've got so many to go through, you're really kind of, your first review will be a skim, and I like to be able to see the objectives, the creative, and aligning with what I'm marking them on. Otherwise, I'm immediately having to step out of the marking.
Yeah, I think, Paul, your point is really important, that the objectives and the results, but also like just reading through stuff that's like super dry, super block text, like try and just put your feet into the shoes of a judge and the 25 that Barry mentioned, and how can yours stand out? How can you make that person's, how can you bring a little bit of shine to that person's day with your entry?
And I'll just add one more and I touched on it in our part. Data discrepancy. I've been in those sort of debating circles, after you've judged, and, I might have judged a paper specifically down on what the room has because I've seen a data discrepancy, and that creates a lot of debate, because if somebody else hasn't spotted that, and I'm talking about significant data discrepancy here, not a small error, but it just makes you skeptical about the robustness of the results. And ultimately, that's not a position that anybody wants to be in, with all the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into, crafting a beautiful paper with, you just don't want to be in that position where somebody's kind of questioning the validity of the data that you've input.
Yeah, and I think I refer again to something Lindsay referred to, is campaigns are not always straightforward. Stimulus changes, circumstances change, and I think a level of honesty and a strategy that's able to react to that brought to life in the paper, and it could be everything was running to plan, and what had to happen was really clearly, concisely brought to life in a paper. It speaks to me as being real life, day-to-day campaign management, and and work. And with that, we are unfortunately out of time. Thanks very much, Pamela, for that question, and everyone else that had some. Thanks very much to our guests for your insight and expert advice. Thank you to Lux, as always, for organising this session and everything we do with the Martin Society Star Awards. I have a couple of final reminders, housekeeping again. There will be an email looking for feedback tomorrow. If you have any questions or you're looking for any advice on how to complete an entry or how to judge, please do contact Lux. And then lastly, there will also be some relevant links to the case studies and to recording from today on tomorrow's email from the Martin Society. And with that, I will bid you all farewell. Thank you for joining. And I thoroughly look forward to meeting some more of you and judging with some of you, to reading some of your papers, and finally to seeing you and celebrating with you in person in the summer for our Star Awards Gala. Thank you very much. Bye now.
Thanks, Paul. Great hosting.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.